the judge has asked numerous questions that really show the incompetence on the government and on their so-called experts, their medical experts, which have nothing to do in the field, versus the CCFR, which are peer-reviewed experts on firearms and firearms in society. So there's actually, it's one of these things. It's people who are making people feel good, which is on the liberal side, the government side, and then actual statistical peer review, true experts on the CCFR side, and they don't even come close. The issue here is the judge actually hearing this, or is this a foregone conclusion?
If, conversant firearm owners can't figure it out, I suspect the RCMP is in the same position.
Adam Soos here, edit once again for Rebel News, and I am on location here at the Shooting Edge in Calgary for an update on our handsoffourguns.ca petition. Now, this is one of the thousands of gun clubs or ranges across Canada where many of the 2.5 million licensed firearms owners in this country come to either practice sport shooting or to zero in their sights in preparation for the hunting season. Now, despite the fact that those very same people subject themselves to extensive screening, daily police checks, safety training, and strict restrictions on how they are able to store and transport their firearms, despite all of this, and despite the fact that they are 3 to 5 times less likely to commit violent crimes with their firearms, according to numerous studies, they have become public enemy number one in the sights of Justin Trudeau and the Liberal government of Canada.
Some politicians said they would make assault-style weapons legal again. Not only did we stand up to them, but we promised to go even further to protect our communities. We proposed to invest to help provinces and territories put restrictions on handguns within their jurisdictions. So we decided to take a new route, something that would tackle this issue at a national level. And so today, we're moving forward. We're introducing legislation to implement a national freeze on handgun ownership.
The May 2020 order in Council saw 1,500 firearms commonly used for sport shooting and hunting prohibited, effectively rendering many law-abiding citizens criminals overnight. Now, there is a certain amnesty period included, and there is a number of questions about how exactly this is to be enforced, but it is, in the eyes of many, an egregious attack against the fundamental rights of firearms owners, in addition to a fundamental attack on this fundamental part of Canadian history, whether it be Indigenous communities or families that grew up hunting. Firearms are part of Canada's cultural identity. This firearms ban was so overreaching that 5 provinces and territories have made clear that they do not intend to enforce this. Here in Alberta, Justice Minister Tyler Shandro has implemented or employed the Alberta Firearms Act as a safeguard or measure to protect Albertans from having their firearms either confiscated or forced into a buyback program. While it is certainly good news that the current government is taking a stand and advocating for firearms owners' rights, with an election looming, there is a serious concern that an NDP government, were they to come in power, could reverse that trend and cooperate with the federal government, fundamentally stripping away those rights from firearms owners. Canadians certainly aren't taking this up front against their fundamental rights within this country, lying down, and a number of organizations, one of which is the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights, is taking a stand and challenging this. I was joined by Eva Chipiuk of Chipiuk Law, who you very likely know from her exceptional work on the Public Order Emergency Commission, to provide her legal insight as an observer as this challenge proceeds.
And the big items that are coming up are in terms of legality, is the discretion of whether the people enacting the rules, regulations, and laws have the discretion to do so. And the second is arbitrariness. That's what we heard yesterday. There was a big talk about discretion, and today it's been a big talk about arbitrariness. And the reason that I'm bringing that up is it's so important for us Canadians to understand that the government only, a certain department should be making certain rules and regulations. And here it's coming into question about who it is making the laws and the rules. Particularly, one lawyer was arguing that it's RCMP even technicians that are making designations about what is a lawful firearm and what is not a lawful firearm. So it's not a minister, it's not a senior bureaucrat that's accountable, it's some low-level RCMP technician. So do they have the discretion to be making these decisions? I'll turn to arbitrariness in a second, but I want to also talk about one reason why this is so important as well, whether or not they're following the rule of law as it stands, is because the consequences to the Canadians, I didn't realize, was so extreme. If RCMP technician is making a decision on whether or not one gun is legal, the consequences of that are criminal charges and imprisonment. Yeah. So this is really crazy to me to be hearing this during these hearings, is that normally I think we think as Canadians that somebody that's making a law that might put you in jail is somebody with the authority, somebody, this has been discussed and debated in the House of Commons, and we have faith that that's the process it went through. But they're really exposing that this has been on a very strange level. These decisions have been made, and the consequences to these decisions are huge on Canadians.
Well, that's extremely troubling, especially lately. We saw with COVID-19 restrictions, we saw unelected health officials, perhaps experts, perhaps not, but making effectively laws that were then enforced, and we're seeing all the sort of fallout in the courts from that. To this day, we're seeing a similar situation with these firearm rights.
What I was hearing is that there's just no proper structures in place for these decision makers or technicians, even at such a low level, to be making these decisions. And what came across to me in watching this proceedings is you actually have like these good, honest Canadians, either, hunters, farmers, First Nations people that want to abide by the law, but they actually don't understand it. That's how convoluted the federal government made it. They want to be good citizens and not take part in criminal activity, but they're honestly so confused that they've had to take it to the court to get them to straighten it out. And that's one thing that came up today. There's not even a mechanism for them to challenge, like, okay, this pistol or rifle or whatever it is, this one has become prohibited overnight. But there's no mechanism for them to challenge just that one thing. So there's no process in place, it seems. There's nobody really taking responsibility for it. So it's a little bit like government gone wild. And these firearm owners are like, what is going on here? There's so many issues, and they had to go to court to bring it up.
Well, I know like years ago there was a 25 round magazine that was little 22 rounds. And it could theoretically, with a little bit of modification, be put into a restricted or prohibited firearm in Canada. So basically everyone who had those for their farms, for gopher shooting, plinking, whatever it was, it became a prohibited item, and you had to destroy it or face jail, as you said, which is absolutely wild because no one's using it for those functions. That firearm, incredibly difficult to procure, but it seems like there's a lot of this. I, barring looking through a list, don't even know what is and isn't permitted. And then there's the additional convolution of provinces being like, well, we're not going along with this. This is absurd. We'll get to that in a minute. But one of the other things I wanted to touch on, and it's a criticism many have sort of volleyed, is that this is practically unenforceable. Some of the firearms that are being discussed here, they're in the hundreds of thousands of people having them. They've never been used or virtually never been used in violent crimes in this country. There's been talk that it would take hundreds of man hours, in fact, hundreds of years of labor to go around knocking on doors, gathering up these firearms that people have had without issue for a long time. The challenge that's being sort of levied against the government, are they hoping for this to be retracted because it's bad? What's sort of the ideal outcome for these legal firearms owners?
Well, what was really interesting that I heard today, and there was so much to it. This has been going on for years and years, so I'm sure this is just a small part what I'm saying. But the applicants brought in some experts, and from what I heard, at least one of the lawyers said the experts weren't even cross-examined. So what that means to regular, outside of legal people is that the government didn't have an opportunity to check whether or not the evidence is correct and check on the expert's credibility. So in essence, that report goes in unchallenged. So that's interesting that the federal government didn't even bother to cross-examine. So that means that their evidence ought to be weighed highly and well, because these, like you said, are like conversant gun people and gun owners. What I heard, which was interesting, is that one of the experts brought in from the applicants actually provided solutions for the government of how this law could be better regulated and drafted so that people can understand it. So not only do you have these gun owners that want to understand the law taking their time and money to go to court and challenge the federal government, they're bringing solutions. They're doing the government's job for them. And I just thought I couldn't believe that was happening. That's how hard they're trying to work with the government, that they brought solutions to the table, that this makes more sense. This would be a better regulation.
And if you look at firearms owners in this country, they subject themselves to high levels of scrutiny, regular police checks, training, ensuring that everything is stored properly. And now they're bringing forward these solutions saying what you've proposed doesn't quite work. If ever there was like sort of a good faith argument, that would be the evidence that you would need for that. With this being sort of so unclear, to the point that many provinces, particularly here in Alberta as well, Justice Minister Tyler Shandro has said that they've used the Alberta Firearms Act to say we're basically not enforcing this at this present time. Is there, and I know with an election looming here provincially, is there this possibility that, say, a government that's very anti-firearms gets in, say the NDP, could they theoretically enforce this and go around locking people up, taking away people's firearms? Is that basically the way the letter of the law is written? Could they do that if they're so inclined?
Well, that is the law right now. So what is in court is challenging whether or not that law is legal. So that is the law. It's about whether or not they're going to be enforced. But that is one of the arguments they were making. And I guess, again, it goes to your enforcement. Is it's just so unclear that I don't think all of the RCMP are really that comfortable with this whole diameter thing and which one is legal. And there were so many demonstrations about if you just tweak it a little bit here, all of a sudden it's not prohibited or not restricted. So I think it's a difficult enforcement, a difficult regulation to enforce because of all this convolution. If, conversant firearm owners can't figure it out, I suspect the RCMP is in the same position.
Well, I think if we have to go back when the first OIC came through in 2020, that was the massive overreach. And then it was the subsequent banning of things when the RCMP lab decided, oh, this thing, it's black. Oh, it must be an AR-15 variant as well. Or, they just started adding and piling on to the pile because they could get away with it. And so the issue is that the OIC is never the final product; it's the start. And so, what's next? And then we saw that with the handgun OIC, and then we saw with the subsequent amendments that they tried to throw on. So it's this systematic attack on firearms owners, and it didn't start and stop with AR-15s. It's now, down to whether it be Mark Vs.
So the other thing that's extremely concerning that you touched on, I think very accurately there, is the sort of concern about some of the experts and specialists that they've had qualifying and classifying. The terms that they're using are not terms that even you or I, as fairly learned, I'd say, or experienced firearms enthusiasts, they're not terms that you probably hear very often here. They're talking about jewel upon barrel exit, and they're talking about bore diameter. How often are those terms used in your daily lexicon here at the Shooting Edge?
Well, they're not. And I think that's what's really important is that the experts at the CCFR and the various pro-firearm groups have put forward in court are really demonstrating how political this is and how it's not based on any kinds of engineering, science, or proper statistics. And if you watch now we've had 2.5 days, or by the time I see this, we'll have 3 days of trials. And the CCFR is destroying these so-called experts. They got the expert, like Murray Smith, who's supposed to be he was in the lab for decades, and he's supposed to be their prime person. He's the one who came up with the determinations on all of these firearms. I mean, he's the one who said that the Derriere Mark 12, which wasn't even semi-automatic when it first came live, was a variant of the AR-15. I mean, this is the kind of asinine stuff that's come out of his mouth, and they've shown him, and the judge has asked numerous questions that really show the incompetence on the government and on their so-called experts, their medical experts, which have nothing to do in the field, versus the CCFR, which are peer-reviewed experts on firearms and firearms in society. So there's actually, it's one of these things. It's people who are making people feel good, which is on the liberal side, the government side, and then actual statistical peer review, true experts on the CCFR side, and they don't even come close. The issue here is the judge actually hearing this, or is this a foregone conclusion? And I would like to think that there's some a modicum of fair play here, but the problem is, as we've seen so many times before, that these are just exercises in futility. I'm hopeful that we'll see some, an actual unbiased and legal representation here.
Now, you're not alone in thinking that, and it's not just firearms enthusiasts. We've seen 5 provinces and territories effectively agree that this is bad law, it's unenforceable. Here in Alberta, we saw Tyler Shandro utilizing the Alberta Firearms Act to say that we're not going to be enforcing this. What is the concern for firearms enthusiasts, whether it be Alberta or elsewhere, if, say, an anti-firearms government were to get in? We have a provincial election looming. If the NDP gets in, can they effectively go around, based on this law as it stands today, and take away people's firearms?
Well, I don't think they can't take them away, but every piece of legislation is always double-edged, and we have to remember that, in that the Alberta Firearms Act is enabling legislation, so they haven't come up with all the policies and procedures. Because of that, it's not like the NDP can come and just take guns away, but they're going to be able to help the feds facilitate it, or they can just give, as the like Calgary, the city police wanted permission just to do, into an agreement, like, Jody Gondak wanted an agreement with the feds and go around the province. Well, the NDP could say, yeah, we are okay with that, and we don't have any say because the legislation allows that. So that's the issue, is that, and I'm scared about an NDP government, and I think every Albertan should be scared, because as we saw when the NDP came in last time, is they used their legislative abilities to really punish businesses in Alberta. I mean, within months of them coming power, we had OHS show up here, and they were being ridiculous and very punitive. And they even said, the inspector said, well, there's a new sheriff in town, referring to the provincial government. I'm like, how dare you? Like, I was so offended. But that's what we have to look forward to if the NDP get in.
In addition to being an attack against communities that go out of their way to safely participate in firearms sports, these laws are, in fact, completely ineffective at addressing firearms violence within this country. In fact, under the Liberal government, we have seen an increase in firearms violence. Beyond this, there are also serious concerns about the lack of clarity and enforcement when it comes to these bans, with terms that are not at all within the lexicon of common firearms users, even informed firearms users, such as joules and bore diameter. Those are not terms that you will commonly hear in the lexicon of firearms enthusiasts. And a lack of clarity in law, especially when there's a potential for serious legal ramifications for people unknowingly violating these laws, does not a good law make. We can certainly hope that governments will stop harassing and targeting law-abiding citizens who go out of their way to comply and safely participate, whether it be in sports shooting or in hunting. And we can also hope that governments will actually address the core issues such as firearms trafficking and gang violence that contribute to firearms violence in this country. But with the current governments, that's not likely to happen. There are looming elections certainly within the next month here in Alberta and within the next couple of years, federally speaking. But even a pro-firearms government, or a government that at the very least respects firearms rights, does not ensure that those rights will prevail in the long term. The price to ensure that that freedom, the fundamental freedom of firearms owners, are maintained within this country, I suspect will be perpetual vigilance. I want to thank you all so much again for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Soos.
Hey, if you agree that the federal government under Justin Trudeau needs to respect legal firearms owners' rights, be sure to go sign our petition at handsoffourguns.ca.